Okay, let's go on to the next topic. Let's talk about storage of firearms as also transportation. Let's go, Jamie. Obviously, you're doing a lot of traveling with your firearms. How do you do it legally?
If you can believe it, this one's actually pretty simple, pretty easy. Relatively compared to the things we've already been discussing. Maybe I need to knock on wood. I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem with theft or a problem with law enforcement. It's pretty simple to make sure you're on the right side of the line. A quick search will take you to the DOJ website, and this half a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper contains all the regulations on how to transport your firearm. This is one issue where you'll do well to not just do the bare minimum to comply with what it says on the website. A couple of extra steps will go a really long way with keeping you good. First and foremost, I think we're going to talk as part of this about the new regulation concerning letting people borrow firearms. But the biggest thing to remember when you're traveling with firearms is make sure you are a person that is eligible to own and have that firearm and be in possession of that firearm. But other than that, like I said, it's pretty simple. Like Michael pointed out, the biggest piece of advice that I could give anybody is to take an extra step. Like the registration just says, for any gun that's concealable, it needs to be in a secured, locked container. And then shotguns and rifles, since they are not concealable, they don't have to be in a locked container. They just can't be loaded. The law says that the firearms can't be loaded, and I believe the widest interpretation of that is you can't have loaded magazines either in the same case as the firearm. So taking steps, the biggest advice I ever give anybody is to use a hard-sided, double-locked container. That's the catchphrase that I always tell everybody, hard-sided, double-locked. So make sure you get like a Pelican case or something similar, put your guns in it, put 2 locks on it. I like to use key locks, and then I retain the key or put the key somewhere else in the vehicle. That way, in the event of a law enforcement situation, if I'm stopped at a traffic stop or whatever, I don't do drugs and I don't drive drunk, so I don't think I'll give the law enforcement officer any reason to go any further. But if your case is hard-sided, double-locked, whatever is in that case presents no danger to anybody, whether it's a telescope or a grenade launcher, whatever's in there is not a danger to anybody if it's in a hard-sided double-lock container. I always tell everybody also, don't put stickers on it that says Smith & Wesson and all my guns are in here and Molon Labe and come and take it and don't tread on me, don't put, all that stuff, don't put it on there. I would not openly consent to a search. And then Calguns has these tags that I put on all my weapons cases. It says, notice to police, the contents of this container are private. Voluntary consent of search is not granted. A search warrant is required for access, has my name, phone number, and email address. And then on the back side, it tells you what you should do in case an officer wants to force a search or something like that. But again, I've never had a problem just adhering to that basic principle. Put your guns in a hard-sided double-lock container. A great piece of advice is if you have an AR or something that may or may not be considered an assault weapon, separate the upper from the lower. One thing I have ran into as a shooter in the state of California is oftentimes gun enthusiasts, the people in this room, competition shooters, military personnel, a lot of times we are more familiar with the firearms laws than a law enforcement officer may be. And that's not an argument you're going to win on the side of the road. So the best thing you can do is take a few extra steps than what is the bare minimum in the law and just avoid the situation altogether.
That's jam-packed with really good advice, particularly the part about police are not always up to speed and they will take license and tell you what the law is. The most important thing to do is say, I do not consent and I want my attorney. And litigate it off the side of the road. Litigate it later on. Let's turn to John Dillon on the in-home storage of firearms.
All right, well, first I'll say what Jamie said in not following the bare minimum when it comes to transportation, that is the best advice you will get. It's the advice I tell all my clients and anyone I talk to when it comes to transporting firearms. do the most you possibly can, and you won't really ever have an issue. So don't do the bare minimum. Lock cases, all your guns unloaded, separate stuff. When it comes to storage, so that's an interesting little subject in California. Generally, under California and federal law, there's no storage requirements for firearms. However, under California law, there are criminal storage charges that can be applied to you based off of how you store your guns, and they all depend on various circumstances. But in general, you have criminal storage in the first, second, and third degree. Under the first degree, basically, it's you knew or reasonably should have known that a child or a prohibited person is likely to gain unpermitted access to the firearm, and they gain access to that loaded firearm, and death or great bodily injury occurs. That's going to be a felony, and so if you live with children or you live with someone who is a prohibited person, or you give access of your home to children or someone who may be prohibited, or just friends in general, keeping a loaded firearm in your house can open you up to a lot of liability, especially if someone comes into the house and they pick it up and do something bad. In the second degree, criminal storage in the second degree, it's someone gets a hold of this loaded firearm and they brandish it or carry it to a public place, and then and it also injures someone. This is actually a misdemeanor, but still, when we're talking about criminal convictions, you don't want a misdemeanor, you don't want a felony, you don't want either of them. But again, that is just slight injury, brandishing that firearm in a public place that can get you in trouble. And again, it's you knew or reasonably should have known that a child or prohibited person could gain access. Under the third degree, which is the most broad and least, you're going to get the least conviction or anything like that on, is if you negligently store the firearm in a location where you know or reasonably should know someone will gain access, and someone does, and they take it to a public place. All of the second and third degree will get you a misdemeanor. First degree will get you a felony. So we're talking, again, kids, prohibited persons. Those are the main things. Under California law, you also, if you live with a prohibited person, they can't have access to those firearms, so it's got to be in a locked container. A child is considered, or a minor is considered a prohibited person. They are not allowed to buy firearms. So if you have a child in the house, technically you should be locking all these guns up in a safe or equivalent lock container, or gun lock, trigger lock, anything like that. Anything that was a reasonable measure to keep someone from taking or using your gun, you really should be using in these cases.
That's very helpful, but also very scary. John Phillips, your advice on storage or transportation.
Well, just to follow up on that, a lot of parents, especially with older children, the teenagers that have been born and raised around guns and are very responsible with them, they cannot have access to your safe. So if they know the code to your safe, that's a problem. So understand that. Just because you have it locked up in a safe, if it was to come out that they had access to it, they're a prohibited person with access to your firearm. So it's a really important point to add on to it. As far as transportation, I think Jamie hit it pretty well. Honestly, we get a lot of, as retired law enforcement myself, I get a lot of phone calls from officers on the side of the road. I got this guy pulled over, I need help. We have more gun laws in California than there are federal gun laws. So we can't expect our police officers, who I love dearly, they're my brother, and we cannot expect that they're going to know what they're looking at, whether it's legal, not legal, whether it's the definition of loaded or unloaded. They'll have a very broad understanding. We don't want to have that argument, as Carl said, on the side of the road. Stay out of the gray area. The best thing to do, I like the idea, especially for now with the bullet button rifles, have them separated. Have the upper and lower in two different pockets or in two different bags until we get this all figured out. On the handgun, gotta be honest, we have hundreds, 500, 1,000 people a day sometimes come through our facility and shoot on our range. We don't go a single day without somebody bringing in a loaded gun. And we clear every gun. It's scary. They consider an unloaded gun, well, there's not a round in the chamber. Well, there's a magazine with rounds in the gun, that's loaded. But people forget the gun's loaded. So just keep that in mind. We all get comfortable around firearms, and we see it a lot, that great gun owners have no intention of ever hurting anybody. All they want to do is practice and protect their family, but they're still traveling with loaded guns, and it's just one of those gotchas. Just don't do it. So that's all I'd add.
Amanda, Michael, anything on storage or transportation?
No, I really think that the panel's already covered that subject pretty well.
Michael?
Thank you.
Just one best practice, if you're transporting it on an airline, and I've only done this a couple of times, but they've been fantastic, but all the airlines actually have their policy printed on the website, so just in case you're checking in with somebody who's a little nervous, just print that out and take it with. Say, hey, here are your policies, I've followed them, that way there's no question, just kind of a little best practice. But when talking about storage of your firearms, just about a year and a half ago, John Dillon actually helped San Diego County gun owners tremendously when the city of Encinitas was going to require all of its residents to store their firearm inoperable in their house, which isn't required by law. In fact, it was pretty clearly addressed in Heller versus DC in 2008 that that's illegal. You can't do that. Your house is your castle. And frankly, had that gone to a vote, we would have lost 3-2, and then I'm sure there would have been had to have been litigation involved, and that would have dragged on. But that was one of the things we did early on as an organization, San Diego County Gun Owners, is we defeated that before that even got to a vote, which is extremely important. And really, what it shows is what you can do if, as an activist, you're really engaged with what's going on at the local level, and then you're vocal about it. And we're organized, in an organized manner. If they receive one letter from one person, it's not as much of an impact as if they really have a spotlight turned on them from an organization full of a bunch of people. So we were really proud to do that, and I think it showed that there's definitely a need and a purpose for what we're doing in an organization that's focused on grassroots issues, that sort of thing, and organizing as gun owners, and that frankly we can move mountains at the local level.
Okay, and we're only halfway through the new requirements, in case you're not confused yet or scared. Let's talk about borrowing. Apparently you're not allowed to let someone borrow your firearm anymore.
Without someone doing something about it, it's not going to get any better.